Now we are live, sir, and we can start.
How long you want to continue the meeting?
Good evening, all. We are going to begin today's webinar organized by All India Safe Education Committee on Indian Knowledge System and Distortion of History. We have three eminent scholars are with us today. Professor Kungum Roy. She is a prominent historian. She is from JNU, Center for Historical Studies, working with the Center for Historical Studies Department, JNU. Professor Soumitra Banerjee, an eminent scientist from Kolkata. And Professor P.L. Vishesh Rao, an eminent academic. He was working with University, Usmania University, Telangana, former Dean, Department of Journalism. Moreover, he is the President of All India Safe Education Committee, Telangana State Chapter. Professor P.L. Vishesh Rao will be moderating today's webinar. On behalf of All India Safe Education Committee, organizing committee of this webinar, I am glad to invite all of you. There will be a live streaming of this program on YouTube. Many academics, intellectuals, of course, education-loving people are expected to watch this program online. However, once again, I welcome all of you. And I invite Professor Vishesh Rao to preside over. Thank you. Over to Professor Vishesh Rao to conduct this webinar.
Yeah, good evening to all of you. It's my pleasant privilege this evening to be participating in this seminar, moderating this seminar. And I'm very happy that, distinguished scholars are going to be making a presentation. Professor Kungum Roy, an outstanding historian from one of the leading universities in this country, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Professor Soumitra Banerjee, an outstanding scientist again with IISER from Calcutta. And there are many other academics, teachers, activists, people who are involved in education or participating in this webinar today. And we are having this webinar on a significant day, January 26th, when all over the country, Republic Day is being celebrated. But then, to make my initial observation, the Republic itself is a big question mark. What is enshrined in the Indian Constitution is being totally nullified and violated. The preamble of our Constitution talks about social justice, economic justice, political justice. We don't seem to have any kind of a justice anywhere. It's unfortunate. The Prime Minister of this country only about 3-4 days ago was saying that this country for the last 75 years has been talking about rights, but they were not talking about duties or patriotism, etc. That is the kind of a essence of his speech. But the Prime Minister of this country ought to be knowing that there is a constitution in this country. There are fundamental rights in this country. The basic tenets of the Indian Constitution talks about equity and equality and basic rights. But he had made those observations. We perhaps will look at if we get some time. Primarily today we are having this webinar comprehensively discussing about Indian knowledge system. What is this Indian knowledge system? What kind of distortions which are taking place in times of writing history or rewriting history? And I'm sure both the scholars will raise those issues much more perceptively. But today, when you look at what is happening in this country, there is attack on scientific temper, rationality of mind. Colleges and universities are supposed to be, discussing day in and day out, how we should go about promoting scientific temper, logic, rationality of mind. But then we know some of them, and Professor Kumkum Roy is working with JNU. We know how colleges and universities are being colonized. And we also know what kind of a research, the government is asking us, all of us to do. So in that kind of a context, I think it's important for me to raise a couple of observations which our Prime Minister has made earlier, that there was, plastic surgery. And he said that, at one of the major conferences addressing, scientists. And he also made those observations, addressing, the scientific congress, science congress. And all of us know that, when we are talking about these kind of things, we need to have evidence. Where is the evidence? And he went further saying that there was, reproductive genetics in ancient times. And mythology, I don't have to say that, there are leading historians here who will talk about mythology itself as myth. In the process, the entire scientific temper is being destroyed in this country. And then, when we look at, about a week ago, I read that one of the leading universities in this country, Banaras University, is introducing a master's course in Hindu Dharma. University is talking about, then, the kind of courses which are being introduced in the country in the name of science, in the name of Indian logic system. They are introducing courses in astrology, chemistry, Vedas, and basic mathematics, numerology. These kind of courses are getting popular. I really don't want to say much, but I just want to summarize what I'm saying. During the past 7 years, there has been a systematic and well thought out and meticulously, I'm very, very consciously using these words, during the past 7 years of Modi's regime, there has been a systematic, well thought out and meticulously orchestrated attack on scientific temper. None other than the Prime Minister Modi led this attack. Just he took oath and initiated what he called as assault on scientific rationality. And we find every day now, the entire team of ministers, chief ministers, members of parliament, his party leaders, join him trying to erase the boundaries of scientific rationality, scientific temper, which Indian constitution talks about. This attack was multi-pronged and revealed itself, in reduction of, expenditure of science and technology. If you look at, the budget in the last 7 years, we find, that investment in science and technology is getting, this is part of that systematic attack. The assaults also took shape, forcing, scientific institutions to take up projects. Now, all over the country, scientific labs.
Hi, I'm Sandhya. I'm from Bombay.
Are asking us to, take projects relating to religious, superstition, quasi-religious nature. However, anti-science environment which has created in the country and forcing the institutions to give up genuine scientific projects in favor of quasi-religious projects has resulted in steep fall in unscientific output in the country. Further, I would like to say the kind of a Hindutva imagination which is going on in the name of mythology, in the name of Ramayana and Mahabharata. Several rewriting of history is taking place in a bigger way. They are trying to introduce courses which are absolutely not based on reason, logic, and science. And another major development which is taking place is what I call saffronization of education, which is taking place in a big way. And what the Indian Constitution talks about, but today we are celebrating Republic Day, secular, socialist orientation which is there in the Indian Constitution is really not visible. In that kind of a context, I think it's very, very important that we are conducting this webinar to look at what is happening in the name of Indian knowledge system, or what kind of a unreasonable courses which are being introduced, how in the name of mythology itself is myth. When we talk about science is based on reason, science is based on logic, and science is based on evidence, and that is being destroyed. And today we have very, very distinguished people, Professor Banerjee, the scientist, and then Professor Kumkum Roy. I would request Professor Kumkum Roy, who is a leading historian, as I've said earlier, working with one of the leading universities of this country, which is under attack today. When you look at the report which was put out by the government of India in terms of ranking of these universities, JNU ranks very, very high. But by their ministry alone identified JNU as one of the leading universities. But then today, day in and day out, they attack the nature of research which is going on in JNU, the kind of people who are working in JNU, history is being rewritten, the nature of people who are being appointed for major teaching positions are vice chancellors with big question mark. Now I request Professor Kumkum Roy of JNU to make a presentation. I request her to take about 20 minutes or so, make her presentation, and then I will request Sumitra Banerjee to make his remarks, and then we'll open it for discussion, and then again on the basis of we will try our best to make it as interactive as possible. With this brief introductory remarks, I request Professor Kumkum Roy to make a presentation. Professor Kumkum Roy.
Thank you very much for your kind words and also for this opportunity to be present on this occasion. I would just like to clarify that I have retired recently from JNU. I retired in November last year, though I remain, my heart remains very closely attached to the university. May I please request the person who is sharing the PowerPoint to begin sharing, and then I can start my presentation.
Yes, 1 minute. 1 minute.
I would like to use this opportunity. Yeah, sure. I'll just continue speaking. Meanwhile, I would just like to say that I want to use this opportunity to provide, to respond to some of the issues that have been raised by the discussion around the Indian knowledge system, their long-term implications, etc., to look at some of these. And at some point of time, we will also be looking at some of the issues in a little bit of detail, because I think those details are also probably important for us. One of the things that I would like to also quickly mention is that I have been discussing some of these issues with colleagues, friends, students, etc. And some of them have responded with very thoughtful suggestions. So briefly to mention Janaki Nair, Poonam Kumari, and Smriti Boda, even though I may not be able to draw on their insights in what I present today. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, I just wanted to mention that what I will be discussing today is based on some of the webinars that are available. All of these are accessible on YouTube. And two of these, which I'm mentioning over here, have been uploaded by the All India Council for Technical Education, or the AICTE. There is also a WhatsApp video in circulation, which pertains to the history of Ayodhya, which is based on chronologies constructed by Sri Vedveer Arya, and it is apparently endorsed by the Ministry of Education, the IKS for short, and Itihasa. Can we move to the next slide? Now, these two links that are there on your screen right now, one is a discussion on the calendar produced by IIT Kharagpur, and it basically outlines the perspective from which that calendar was designed. The second link is from a discussion which responds to the limitations of the calendar, pointing out these limitations in terms of geological, archaeological, historical, and linguistic evidence. And the speakers in the second webinar were Mayank Vahia, Kurush Dalal, Kanad Sinha, and Ramesh Gauri Raghavan. And for some of you, you might find it interesting to look at their arguments because they have very detailed arguments, which I will not be repeating over here. Can we move to the next one? What I would like to do is to very briefly provide an overview of the contents of the IKS, keeping in mind that this is not a static list. It seems to be continually expanding. From that, I will move on to issues of chronology, because that is something that is of concern to us as historians, especially in the context of ancient Indian history. And then I will touch very briefly on the assumptions that animate this entire project and the challenges that these pose, before suggesting some ways in which it is important for us to retain our existing historical perspectives, even as we might need to revisit these in order to deepen, qualify, refine them. So rather than discarding them, which seems to be the objective right now, it's important to see what we can do with our historical understanding and what are the ways in which we can develop it. The next one. Now, one of the preoccupations of the IKS is with ancient Indian educational institutions. And while these are generally listed as Taxila and Nalanda, the list occasionally expands to include Vikramshila and Vallabhi. What is noteworthy is that the strenuous and consistent attempt is to identify their features and say that these are comparable with present-day Western universities. Also involved is the what is very frequently invoked is the Guru Shishya Parampara. And this is regarded as something that is central, and what is regarded as something that existed as an ancient system of primary education comprising of reading, writing, and mathematics, as well as knowledge of the Sanskrit epics. And it is lamented that this Gurukul system, as well as the basic education, primary education, was destroyed by the British, and the implication is that these need to be restored. The next one. We also find an emphasis on mining and metallurgy, astronomy, astrology, the distinction is very often blurred, medicine, mathematics, yoga, the 64 kalas, aeronautics, grammar, etc. So these are basic contents that are available in terms of the IKS. And as we can see, even this sample list is rather long, and I will not go into the details of some of these, which several people have critiqued elsewhere, including what is the notion of the 64 kalas, etc. And I will also not go into the a discussion on science and technology, but I will briefly touch on some of the evidence that we have for mining and the implications of that. The next one. Now, when we have these comparison between the ancient Indian educational institutions and modern universities, these are some of the points that are taken up for comparison. What are the subjects that were taught, whether there was academic freedom or not, whether they were residential, provisions for funding, whether they were secular, what kind of autonomy, peer reviews, etc., women's education, funding, libraries. And invariably, what the conclusions that are drawn, it's a kind of foregone conclusion in some ways, is that all that is supposed to be valuable in these universities at present existed in the past. Now, in this exercise, what we can see is that there is an assumption that all centers of learning were more or less identical, which is something that seems unlikely. Secondly, we know that where we do have histories of universities that have been documented, these tend to be complex in terms of who taught, what was taught, who were the people who had access to these universities, how these universities were related to other institutions such as state structures, religious institutions, the wider socio-economic and cultural context. Now, what happens is when we work with this kind of a checklist, which is what is being done at present, these rich and complex histories get erased or they get flattened out completely with the sole objective of claiming that we had priority in respect to all of these in our ancient institutions. What is also worrying is the implication of reviving the Guru Shishya Parampara. Now, there is a certain romanticization of traditional modes of learning. There's a nostalgia about them. But it is also important for us to remember that many of these modes were exclusive. and they were often inaccessible to women as well as to men who belonged to the lowest rungs of the social order. So it is in this context that the suggestion that there is a need to revive this kind of a parampara as well as the mode of education, basic education consisting of reading, writing, arithmetic, and the Sanskrit epics, this becomes particularly problematic because if it is implemented, it will have its sharpest impact on those who will continue to access state-run educational institutions, who are generally the least privileged in terms of gender, caste, class, and community. And if we contextualize this in terms of the fraught status of the right to education right now, the situation appears even more dismal and something that we need to think about. The next one. Yeah, I'll just discuss one example from the ancient knowledge about mining and metallurgy. So this contains several texts that I mentioned, but I'm just choosing the Arthashastra because this happens to be a fairly well-known text. And the relevant part of the Arthashastra is from Book 2, Chapter 12, which is titled the Karmanta Pravartanam. And it contains details about how to identify metal-bearing soils through an examination of their color as well as their odor. It also contains a list of various substances that could be used to treat ores in order to obtain metals. And the substances listed include urine, parts of trees, various animal products like cow's bile, the urine and dung of buffalo, different kinds of grain, milk, honey, ghee, etc., as well as the powders made out of the teeth and bones of cattle. Now, these recipes can be seen as being interesting, and they certainly would require verification. And it is possible that they encapsulate several stages of experimentation undertaken by ordinary miners and metal workers, and that might have got codified in the Sanskrit text. And I think this is significant because it alerts us to the possibility that knowledge sometimes gets codified and ossified, even as it might emerge from complex processes. And this is something I would like to return to slightly later. The next one. Now, one of the basic tensions in the IKS notion of chronology is perhaps best exemplified by the slogan eternal and ancient. Now, this is routinely presented and it resonates through several presentations. There are variations, so eternal can be replaced by timeless or sometimes by time immemorial. And the fundamental contradiction between claiming that something is eternal and unchanging and therefore permanent, and that something is ancient and is therefore within a time frame, that contradiction remains unacknowledged and unaddressed. But obviously it is something that is comforting and reassuring, and the slogan is something that then gets reiterated, especially in times like the present, where we are faced with enormous uncertainties, both in the near and the distant future. And again, there are frequent assertions related to this that the Aryans have always been here, even though why the Aryan identity needs to be claimed and proclaimed, and the ways in which the Aryans can be identified, it remains quite confusing and nebulous. So it can range from the physical to the ethical to the moral. And given the fact that the term Aryan was a multivalent term in ancient texts, what becomes increasingly problematic is the urgency with which it is being reclaimed at the present juncture. Now, apart from this, we have other chronological markers, and one of these, which has now slipped into almost everyday commonsensical usage through this constant reiteration, is that of 1,000 years of colonization, which then becomes the means of obliterating any mention of knowledge systems that evolved and were preserved during that period. And this lays the basis for erasing historical memories of that entire period. a third point that is again acquiring rapid currency is distinguishing between 1947 and 2014. The former, we are told, coincided with political independence, and the latter is, we are assured, it marks the beginning of cultural independence. So again, the claims that are being made need to be considered carefully. Now, while these are constant refrains, there are occasional references to other time frames. So at least in one instance, there is a reference to the 18th century Industrial Revolution marking a difference, or to 12,000 years ago when you have settled human existence, that marking a difference, etc. But these claims are relatively marginal. The next one. Now, coming specifically to ancient Indian history, you have now this chronology, which is being advocated by Sri Vedveer Arya, and also, as I mentioned, within the Indian knowledge systems, and again by the Ministry of Education. Now, if you look at the dates that are being given for the Vedic periods, these are really about 10,000 years earlier than the dates that have been widely accepted at present. And why these are being questioned is something that one needs to seriously think about. So all these dates that we have for the Vedic period are 10,000 years earlier than what we have, what has been accepted and evolved through a long process of debate and discussion among scholars over nearly 200 years. The next one. Now, this is again a set of dates which is now being circulated. So the Buddha is being pushed back to 1944 BC. The Mauryas, we will leave Mahapadmananda out for the moment, but the Mauryas are being pushed back to this period of the 16th to 15th centuries BC. Now, all these dates are astonishing, to say the least, and they are supposed to be based on astronomical data. Now, not being an astronomer, I'm not in a position to verify or examine these, but there are some issues that one can flag even as an outsider, drawing on the texts that are cited as well as the inscriptional evidence. Now, all these calculations are supposed to be based on a text which is no longer available. This is a Siddhanta attributed to Mayasura. And one wonders how this can provide a sufficient basis for such drastic revisions. Moreover, we are informed, and this I'm quoting, this is that in the period of the Rig Veda, a yuga meant 5 years. And this is assumed on the basis of a verse attributed to the sage Dirghatamas, which states that he was in his 10th yuga. Now, the Rig Veda is a text which has it uses a great deal of poetic imagery, and whether we can convert those metaphors into hard scientific data is something that one can debate about. And why the yuga should then become equal to 5 years is something that is entirely unclear. But we are told that, seeing that he mentions that he was in his 10th yuga, and yugas should be 5 years, therefore he must have been about 49 or 50 years old. And then we are told that this is the yuga date gets revised by multiplying 1200 into 360, and then you keep on multiplying till you get the Chatur Yuga and the Kalpa. So you have all of these which are apparently necessary for astronomical calculations. The next one. Now, can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah. Now, what is equally baffling is the shifting of the date of the Mauryas, because this is something that has been very precisely worked out on the basis of the 13th major rock edict of Ashoka. And these dates, let me state, were not arrived at by the much maligned Marxist historians, but they have been accepted and referenced for over a century. We can look at the classic work of the political history of ancient India written by H.C. Rai Chaudhuri in the 1920s, and which has been consistently revised through the 20th century. the last major revision was also by a very noted historian, Bratindranath Mukherjee, who revised this text in 1996. And the date of Ashoka is fixed by the fact that he refers to all these kings, Tudamaya, Maga, Antekina, Adikasudara, etc., who have been identified with rulers who were his contemporaries, ruling in Egypt, North Africa, Macedonia, and either Corinth or Epirus in Greece. And if you look at the dates where they were all more or less ruling, you can see that there is a way in which you can narrow down the date of Ashoka. And once you have the date of Ashoka, you can project backwards to work out the date of the other Maurya rulers, both before and after him. So there seems to be absolutely no justification for pushing the Mauryas back to the 15th century BC, simply in order to accommodate and validate Puranic king lists. And that these chronologies run counter to archaeological evidence is also worth noting, even though I would not like to enter into the details at this stage. Now, it is uncertain what these new confusing chronologies achieve, apart from working towards an unverifiable claim to an ever-increasingly distant past. And in the immediate context, what they do is they draw attention from other areas of serious historical scholarship, which has been something that people have worked on for several decades now. And apart from several strands within the Marxist scholarship, we have witnessed major insights that have emerged from, and these are often disturbing insights, challenging the status quo, which have emerged from feminist, Dalit, Bahujan perspectives. New and pressing questions have also been posed from the point of view of environmental histories. And if we are compelled to engage with these kind of chronological constructions on a full-time basis, it leaves little time or energy or resources for far more challenging engagements with past traditions. And at the same time, if we let these pass into common sense without scrutiny, whatever has been achieved through nearly 2 centuries of painstaking epigraphic, numismatic, archaeological, and textual studies will be lost in a flood of dates whose significance remains uncertain. The next one. Yeah. Now, the obsession with claiming chronological priority is part of a preoccupation with instilling pride. There are occasional cautionary remarks. So somebody will say we should not over-glorify or we should not demonize. But by and large, as we know, the line between pride and arrogance is a very thin and frail one, and it is very easily blurred. And inevitably, related to this, you have a preoccupation with the direction of the transfer of knowledge. And while there is an occasional acknowledgement that there are flows of knowledge from west to east and east to west, multidirectional, by and large, the dominant idea is that knowledge has almost always flowed out of India, moving from east to west, as well as to Central and East Asia, as well as to Southeast Asia. And in one instance, even paper and printing, which are commonly recognized as Chinese inventions, even these are appropriated. So, Eurocentrism, which is justifiably critiqued,
see, remaining participants, please mute. Co-host, kindly take over. Sharing the page, I am unable to do. Other co-host can mute this. Please do. Madam, you please continue, madam.
Can I continue? Yeah. So what you have then is Eurocentrism, which has been justifiably critiqued, is now being replaced by an unproblematized Indocentrism. But even more problematic, perhaps, than this claim to spatial centrality is the social direction that is taken for granted, both explicitly and implicitly. So virtually all major texts and traditions, inventions, discoveries are attributed to seers and sages, the munis and rishis. And there is virtually no space to explore the possibility that these knowledge systems evolved through complex processes of discovery, debate, contestation, experimentation, verification, acceptance, and rejection, which less exalted ordinary people may have participated in routinely on an everyday basis. In the case of fields such as agriculture, animal husbandry, architecture, sculpture, medicine, crafts like pottery, metallurgy, weaving, and many others, understanding would have emerged through processes in which ordinary people, craftsmen and women, who were assigned a low status in the Varna Jati social order within the Sanskrit Shastric tradition, played a crucial role. Any understanding of knowledge systems that does not take into account the role of these anonymous people is extremely limited, to say the least. In other words, the social context within which knowledge and skills have been acquired and transmitted, as well as challenged with all their complexities, must be acknowledged. There are other glaring lacunae. While there is some acknowledgement of ancient Tamil traditions, there is absolutely no mention of the wealth of Perso-Arabic material that is available and the unique, invaluable repositories that exist within the country. I will cite just one example of such a collection, that of the Khuda Bakhsh Oriental Library, Patna. Its online Persian and Arabic manuscripts alone, the catalogue alone, and there are other languages like Sanskrit, Urdu, and regional languages as well. But the Persian and Arabic manuscript catalogue itself runs into 43 volumes and includes subjects ranging from poetry to history, biography, philology, science, medicine, logic, ethics, jurisprudence, theology, philosophy, and metaphysics. So ignoring such invaluable collections can only be at our own cost. There are other issues as well. Some of what is envisaged in terms of implementation and propagation of the IKS is intriguing, to say the least. One is a proposal to set up a planetarium. Now, this planetarium, we are told, will contain evidence on Indian literary creations, so the Vedas, Puranas, Mahabharata, also the works of Panini, Kalidas, and Bhavabhuti. It will contain evidence about archaeological sites, description of Indian kings and their achievements, discussions on temples, monasteries, stupas, universities, cities, international ports, trade, and again, international matrimonial alliances. Now, how or any or all of these are connected with the planetarium is something which remains entirely unclear. Also unclear is the relevance of the almost mantra-like response to issues of environmental degradation. One cannot help wondering whether routine reminders of practices of worshipping elements like water, fire, air, and earth in many of our traditions is sufficient as a response to the current global crisis. The next one. Now, can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah. Now, there's also another matter, and that is that several of the webinars pertaining to the IKS have been organized by the AICTE. Now, as per the act of setting up the AICTE, it was supposed to be doing things like covering programs of technical education, training and research in engineering, technology, architecture, town planning, management, pharmacy, applied arts and crafts, hotel management, catering, etc. Now, why one wonders is something like ancient Indian chronology being taken up and promoted by the AICTE. That is, I think, something which is worth thinking about, and we probably need to look for answers. I would like to conclude by touching on some possibilities and illustrate this with a story from a Jataka, which is the Jatakas, as we know, are repositories of popular traditions, sometimes, and they have a great deal of down-to-earth wisdom as well. Students of history are often asked what lessons can be learned from the past, and we often do not have very easy answers. But perhaps the most challenging lesson is that there is often no neat or straight trajectory between intentions and outcomes. One can consider the oft-cited sentence from Macaulay's Minute of 1835, which is very often cited in the context of discussions on education, where he said that we must at present do our best, to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, a class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes and opinions, in morals and intellect. Now, the extent to which this objective was achieved has been and can be debated endlessly. At the same time, there is no denying that access to education, amongst other things, was used creatively and constructively by many women and men for whom most of the earlier educational institutions had remained virtually out of bounds. This and the circumstances, both local and global, often opened up the potential for transformations that could not have been anticipated by Macaulay. So even as the proponents of the IKS may hope to instill pride, justified or otherwise, in what they identify as valuable ancient traditions, the outcome may not always correspond to their intentions. The survival of some of the Jataka stories, and I'm citing from the Pali anthology, of almost over 550 stories, is a reminder of some of these possibilities. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah. This is the Santhabha Jataka, which is number 162 in the anthology as we have it today. And according to this short story, the Bodhisattva was born as a Brahmana in this particular birth. His mother asked him to choose between becoming a householder or renouncing and residing in the forest. He opted for the latter. One day, he received a rich offering of payasam cooked with ghee. He decided to offer it into the sacrificial fire. The fire blazed up with the ghee, and his whole shelter caught fire. After extinguishing the blaze, the Bodhisattva decided to extinguish the sacrificial fire as well, condemning it for ruining everything. And then he went off into the Himalayas. Now, the creation and circulation of such accessible critiques of the sacrificial ritual in simple and vivid language is a reminder that ancient India was by no means a monochromatic world. Thus, while there were advocates of sacrifices, there were everyday dissenters as well. It is up to us to try and recover, preserve, and transmit these histories of plurality and diversity and of non-conformity. The next one. And this, of course, is in the hope that Tagore's prayer for a world without boundaries, where knowledge is free, will be realized. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kungum Roy.
Thank you,
And
Professor
now,
Kungum Roy, for your very, very, perceptive and a very historical account of, that there is a need for archaeological evidence. Then, you quoted from Ramayana and Mahabharata, and you also extensively quoted Arthashastra. And in the process, you said, 1,000 years of colonization. And very significant point you made, knowledge cannot be a monopoly of anyone. And then you talked about, role of AICT in terms of, looking at, some of this content. Ultimately, finally, you ended up saying that, plurality and diversity is important, in terms of, any kind of a learning. And I think, it's been a very historical account of, Indian knowledge system. Now, we request, Professor Soumitra Banerjee. As I've said, Professor Soumitra Banerjee is a leading scientist working with IISER, Calcutta. I also request him to take about 20 minutes to make his presentation.
Thank you. Can you see the presentation slides?
Yeah, we are able to see.
Okay. Thank you. I wholeheartedly thank the Safe Education Committee for organizing this webinar on a very important topic. In fact, when the new education policy came, many of us did not really have an inkling of what it's going to lead to. Because the Indian knowledge systems, the fact that the Indian knowledge systems is the main theme was not really apparent from the text of the new education policy. Only in the beginning it states that the rich heritage of ancient and eternal Indian knowledge and thought has been a guiding light of this policy. Right up front it says this. But later, apart from one or two sentences, we did not find much. For example, it says in Article 4.27 that the knowledge of India, sorry, I need to kill this. The knowledge of India will include knowledge from ancient India and its contributions to modern India and its successes and challenges. Indian knowledge systems, including tribal knowledge and indigenous and traditional ways of learning, will be covered and included in mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, yoga, architecture, medicine, agriculture, engineering, linguistics, so on and so forth. And an engaging course on Indian knowledge system will also be available to students in the secondary school as an elective. That's all it says. And so those who studied the 66-page document did not have a clue what it's going to lead to, including me, I'd say. The first clues started coming soon. The document was accepted in the parliament, I suppose it was in June or July of 2020. And in November, 6 to 8 November, the IIT Kharagpur organized the international webinar on Indian knowledge systems. And in that, the education minister, the Minister of State for Education, the education secretary, everybody was speaking. And from their speeches, which are now available on the YouTube, we can also hear that, we could get a glimpse of what things are leading to. And then in February 2021, the institutions related to the, at that time it was the MHRD, the Ministry of Education, received a letter from the ministry asking all institutions to organize programs to disseminate the ideas of NEP in collaboration with something called Bharatiya Shikshan Mandal. And IITs, NITs, and IISERs organized these programs. And from what these people who came from the Bharatiya Shikshan Mandal said, we could piece together a wholesome story. Actually, even though they do not say what Indian knowledge systems are, this is what they are positing at the center of the changes in the education system that they're envisaging. But we have to understand what these are from what they're saying. So let us see what they're saying regarding what they think was the Indian knowledge system. For example, this man, he was the chief minister of Uttarakhand, Trivendra Singh Rawat. He said the cow is the only animal that exhales oxygen. This man, he is the chief minister of Tripura, Biplab Dev. He says the internet and television existed in the days of Mahabharata. How else could Sanjay give a running commentary to the blind king? Then in the Indian Science Congress that happened in 2015, a paper was presented where somebody called Captain Bodas, I don't know, he's not a scientist, somehow he found his way into to present a paper in the Congress. And he said the airplanes existed in the Vedic times, and these were huge structures which could not only fly forward, but also left, right, back, in contrast to the modern aircraft, which only fly forward. And not only that, modern aircraft can fly from one place to another, but in those Vedic times, aircraft could fly from one planet to another. And these are some of the pictures that he showed, that the ancient aircraft look something like this. And in fact, these are from a book called Vaimanika Shastra, and a group in IISc Bangalore had studied these structures and had concluded, wrote a paper on that and concluded that such structures can never fly. This man, he was the Union Minister of State for Education, Satyapal Singh. He said Darwin's theory was wrong. Why? Because nobody saw an ape turning into a man. And therefore, according to him, Darwin's theory is wrong. And not only that, he being the Minister of State for Education, he said that Darwin's theory needs to be changed in the school and college curriculum. And finally, we have to talk about the Prime Minister himself. Let's hear from him directly. I suppose you can hear it, right?
Yeah, we are able to hear.
Not audible. Not clearly audible.
And then we have to hear the last education minister speaking in the parliament. Okay, so Mr.
Professor,
Nishank,
you may kindly summarize because many of us do not know Hindi.
Okay, yes, it was in Hindi. Mr. Modi said that the birth of Karna was an instance of stem cell technology being used in those days. And then he said that the fact that the head of Ganesha is an elephant head, this stands as a proof that plastic surgery existed at that time, so advanced that it could plant an elephant head on a human torso. And Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank, who at that time was an MP, he was speaking in the parliament in support of Mr. Modi, and he said that not only we had that kind of technology, only we had this kind of technology, and we should be proud of that. And he said that we also had Jyotish, that is astrology, and he claimed that science is a dwarf. Science is a dwarf in comparison to astrology. And after this, he was made the education minister. The question then is that what you could understand that what they mean by Indian knowledge system is that whatever scientific developments or technological developments we see today, those things, they claim that these existed in the ancient time. Stem cell technology, internet, television, aircraft, and so on and so forth. And surgery to the extent of being able to plant an elephant head on a human torso. The question then is, can this be true? Or somebody can say, why don't you accept that these were true? There are a few reasons why we cannot. Firstly, all these claims have been made after these things have been invented by modern science and technology. Nobody talked about any aircraft in the ancient times before Wright brothers invented the aircraft and it came to regular use. Nobody said that the Karna's birth was an instance of stem cell technology before we heard of stem cell technology by modern science. And if these things were really there in the Vedic literature, then simply there should be some discoveries, inventions by reading the Vedic literature. Not a single discovery or invention has happened by reading the ancient texts. And moreover, in order for a technology like the aircraft to happen, there has to be some developments in fundamental science. One has to know about aerodynamics, one has to know about thermodynamics, one has to have some idea of internal combustion engines so that there is the aircraft can be propelled and things like that. And unless these fundamental developments happened, it is not possible to invent just an aircraft. But nobody talks about any development of, say, thermodynamics, second law of thermodynamics, or even, say, Bernoulli's principle in the ancient time. Nobody even claims that. And finally, if something like aircraft or, say, Brahmastra, people say that Anubam ka parishan hua tha, he says, which means that Rishi Kanad tested atom bombs, was the first person to test atom bombs. So if this kind of technological gadgets were there, some archaeological evidence must be there. Somewhere, some broken fragment of an aircraft should be found. Nothing has been found anywhere. And then in that same international webinar, Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank, who was the education minister, announced that in IIT Kharagpur, they will create a center for excellence on Indian knowledge systems. And now this has been created. I mean, whenever they claim anything like that, immediately the money flows, even though money doesn't flow for normal research. And then this Center for Excellence has published the calendar. The calendar's objective, it clearly states as that it's a recognition of the secret of the Vedas, reinterpretation of the Indus Valley civilization, and rebuttal to the Aryan invasion myth. And they claim that they are providing 12 evidences. With the small time given, I will not talk about this. I would request everybody to just take a look at that. We will take a look at these claims that they made, and we'll check whether that's possible or not. So I'll just skip those slides which I had made containing what this particular calendar contains. So I'll just skip all that. The question is then, the Indus Valley civilization, they claim, was a part of the Vedic era. Can that be true? Actually, there are a few evidence that were found at the time when these cities, the Indus Valley cities were found. The Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, at that time itself, some evidences were there. For example, it was found that these cities were basically made of bricks. And the other clue was that in the whole extent of the Vedic era, spanning about 1,000 years, not a single brick has been found. No brick-made building has been found. And the first brick-made building has been found in a temple in Bhitargaon in UP. That dates around 6th century AD. It is, for example, in Ashoka's time, which is 3rd century BC, the structures were made of wood and timber and stone. This is the first structure that we find, which is after the Indus Valley civilization, which is made of brick. So in between, there is about 1,500 years period in which not a single brick has been found, which means that these people did not make bricks. So had they been the same civilization, obviously they would know how to make bricks. That did not happen. Secondly, in the Indus Valley, there were seals, terracotta seals, and each seal contains an image of an animal. And you see, these are typical images. You see too many bulls, you see elephants, you see tigers, you see, and also imaginary animal with the body of a bull and head of a deer with one horn. Some Western historians have called it the unicorn, because that unicorn image was there in the Western civilization, but it is just an imaginary animal. The point is that there is not a single image of a horse. And therefore, the conclusion was that horse is not found in, was not there in the Indus Valley, but horse is the main animal in the Vedic literature. So had they been the same culture, then it would not happen. Thirdly, the Indus people had written script. We have not been able to read that because it's completely dissimilar to any of the modern scripts, but they had script. And we also know that Rig Vedas were not written initially. It was transmitted by Smriti and Shruti, which means that it is by oral tradition that had to be done because writing developed much later. So if it is the same civilization and its continuation, they would have a written script. That did not happen. And finally, the huge extent of Vedic literature, Vedas, Vedanga, Vedanta, Upanishad, Purana, so all these never say anything regarding a city life with big buildings, city life with a drainage system, with the covered drains and things like that, grid pattern of roads and things like that. These things are simply not there in any Vedic literature. So based on this, at that time itself, historians concluded that this must be a pre-Vedic civilization. And they are now claiming that the Vedic Aryans were indigenous people of India. The reason scientists contradict that claim is the horse, because horse is the main animal in the Vedic literature and horses are not there in any Indian forest. Horse is not an Indian animal. So they must have been brought to India with men. And secondly, linguistics. The languages in the European countries and in in our part of Asia, as well as in Iran, Iraq, all these places, there are similarities in the structure of the languages. That's why it is called the Indo-European family of languages. For example, there are similarities like English we say father. In Greek, it says pater. In Latin also it's pater. So that's why you have paternal uncle. And Sanskrit we say pita. And there are similarities. You can easily trace those similarities in different languages. Not only in similarity in words, there are also similarity in grammar. So we have the case system. We have the verb depending on gender. The structure of the verb depends on gender. Structure of the verb depends on number. Is it one? Is it two? Is it many? So depending on that, so dual number is not there in many languages, but it was there in Sanskrit, and it's also there in some of the European languages. And based on these evidences, linguists have pieced together the way biologists piece together the evolutionary history of the animal world. In the same way, linguists piece together the evolutionary history of the languages. And it is now believed that this language group has radiated along with human migrations, starting from a common birthplace. And the branching pattern has also been pieced together. So now we know that there are two types of Indo-European languages. One is called the centum languages, which includes all these European language families. And there's another branch going, which is called centum languages, which include the Indian languages, as you can see here, right? And there are some languages which are now extinct. So now the whole language tree has been pieced together. Now we know that at some point, the Aryan language speaking people entered India and thereby created a civilization. Most important evidences have come very recently from genome sequencing studies. It has been found that men have two chromosomes, XY, and women have XX. So in the Y chromosome, there is a particular part which is called haplogroup R1A, which is found in people living in Europe, in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, including the Indian subcontinent. But this particular haplogroup is not found in the genome of the Indus Valley civilization people. In Haryana, there is a place called Rakhigadi in which a skeleton has been found, and its genome could be extracted, and that genome did not contain this particular haplogroup. So the present Indian people and the people of the present Indian people contain a particular part of the Y chromosome, which was not there in the people on the Indus Valley civilization. And this particular haplogroup originated in the Pontic-Caspian steppe. So we know that there has been an influx of people from that steppe area into the Indian subcontinent. And now other evidences have also put together. That means this particular haplogroup has been subdivided into two separate haplogroups, Z282 and Z93. One part is found in Europe, another part is found in Central Asia, and we know when they branched out, and from there we can piece together a timing of entry of a new set of people, mainly a male-dominated migration. And that happened around 4,000 to 3,500 years ago, around 2000 to 1500 BC. And there is no evidence of warfare and destruction in the Indus Valley cities. So it is believed that the Aryan migration happened after the Indus cities disintegrated, or city life became non-sustainable because of natural factors like drought. The point is that they are claiming all these, but actually there was a lot of development of science and technology in ancient India. There were great developments in mathematics. For example, we know that zero and the place value system were introduced here. I will not say exactly here, but there's a large part, including Southeast Asia, including China, where there were trade relations. Where exactly it happened, we do not know. But we know that the arithmetic using the place value system definitely developed in the Indian subcontinent. And there were great developments in astronomy, there were great developments in metallurgy, alchemy, medical science, Charaka and Sushruta, you know that, and linguistics, the Vedic Sanskrit and the later part, the Sanskrit that were used later are different. And in between came Panini, who worked on language and gave it a very structured form. It's a very great work in linguistics. All these are actually documented and factual. And therefore, we have reasons to be proud of that. But it is not this that they are planning to teach or introduce in the education system. They are planning to introduce all these unscientific beliefs, personal beliefs, into the education system. And there are new courses now being recommended by the AICTE, All India Council for Technical Education. And AICTE has a
Professor, I am unable to hear.
Yeah, I know. I think, we have lost the link.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe, after we get the link anyway, he was just making his concluding remarks.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, he has also raised, very important issues, Professor Sumitro Banerjee. He debunked, through his, scientific evidence, that internet and all this technology did not exist. Aeroplanes did not exist in Vedic times. And he also raised an issue about, Darwin theory, how, they were saying that Darwin theory is wrong. And he raised, very, very stridently how the Prime Minister, Education Minister in Parliament, was, raising these issues about science and technology in ancient times, which does not have any kind of evidence at all. And he also very clearly said, how, institutions of learning, science and technology are today being misused, particularly in Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. And then, finally was saying, no evidence of warfare, how they are introducing, courses in, the kind of a technology which exists in Sanskrit and yoga and spiritual values. And, AICTE is an institution which is created by the Parliament. AICTE is the body which is having, science and technology. They themselves, are going to be propagating, these kind of courses. Then, where is scientific evidence? Where is logic? Where is rationality of mind? Those issues, very, very perceptively they have raised. And now, we'll open it for discussion. Anyone who's speaking can
Professor is back. Sir, Professor Sumitro is back. Supposing that Professor Sumitro is back.
Sumitro is back?
Yes, he is back.
Yeah, he was just making a final remark. They're saying that no evidence of warfare, etc. Yes, Professor Sumitro.
Professor, you have to unmute and speak, Professor. Professor, you have to unmute and speak.
Yeah, suddenly I lost contact. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, these things happen, and just a minute. Yeah. Okay. I have to share, I suppose, again. Yes.
In taskbar, you will be seeing share screen that you have to click. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the AICT has now introduced a course on Indian knowledge systems, and they are now coming up with textbooks, and they have also instructed colleges and universities to introduce courses on Sanskrit for technical knowledge, value education, stress management by yoga, personality development through light enlightenment skills, and so on and so forth. Essentially, you can see belief-based systems. Not only that, sorry, I have to go to slideshow mode. Yeah. All the central government institutions have received a instruction to organize something called Surya Namaskar. So science and technological institutions, students and faculty members will assemble in the morning and do Surya Namaskar. It's a program called 75 crore Surya Namaskar project as a part of the new education policy. Now, in addition, it says that Sanskrit will now be mainstreamed. And in Article 22.15, it says, due to its vast and significant contributions and literature across genres and subjects, its cultural significance and its scientific nature, rather than being restricted to single-stream Sanskrit pathshalas and universities, Sanskrit will be mainstreamed with strong offerings in school as well as higher education. It will be taught not in isolation, but in interesting and innovative ways, and connected to other contemporary and relevant subjects such as mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, linguistics, dramatics, yoga, etc. Which means that now the science and technological institutions will have to teach Sanskrit as a subject. Not only that, in consonance with the rest of this policy, say this thing continues on the same para, Sanskrit universities too will move towards becoming large multidisciplinary institutions of higher learning. Departments of Sanskrit that conduct teaching and outstanding interdisciplinary research on Sanskrit and Sanskrit knowledge systems will be established and strengthened across the new multidisciplinary higher education system. Sanskrit will become a natural part of the holistic multidisciplinary higher education. And there are mechanisms of doing that. For example, the B.Ed course will become a B.Ed plus Sanskrit course. The point is, through this, what they are saying, when the Bharatiya Shikshan Mandal person came to our institution and talked, he talked about, okay, introduce Sanskrit. Why? Because there's the treasure in Sanskrit, and that is what you have to convey to your students. Fine. So the question is, first I said that what they picture as the ancient Indian knowledge system or the Sanskrit knowledge system is not something that really existed. It is basically something imaginary. But one might question, can't we teach, for example, from Brahmagupta's writings? Can't we teach from Bhaskaracharya's writings? What is wrong with that? I would say, no, that's also not correct. Why? Because science is a cumulative process. Whatever they contributed has become a part and parcel of modern science. That's integral part of science. For example, we do not teach classical mechanics from Newton's writings, Principia Mathematica. Why? Because now it has become a part of the available knowledge system and it has advanced beyond Newton's time. Therefore, we teach the latest knowledge, which includes Newton's contribution. So Brahmagupta's contribution, Bhaskara's contribution, Aryabhata's contribution are all integrated into the knowledge system that we have right now. And science has progressed. Science has not stood at their stage. And many of the ideas that were right have been integrated into the knowledge system, and the ideas that were wrong, they have been discarded. For example, the astronomy that we are talking about, astronomical, not everything was right. So, for example, the fact that Earth goes around the sun was not there at all in any of the Indian astronomical ideas. Aryabhata only talked about the fact that Earth rotates around its own axis, not around the sun. Therefore, that had to be changed, right? So, we should not go back to the ancient knowledge system. We do regard their positive contribution in a very as very important historical fact in the history of science, but that should not be taught. And in fact, in Vidyasagar's time, two of the textbooks on science, on mathematics was Lilavati and Bijganit from Bhaskaracharya. And Vidyasagar stopped teaching those and said that by learning from those, students are actually not learning mathematics proper. They can learn much more from the modern mathematics books. So he introduced modern mathematics in his college. But still, we need to see what the Sanskrit knowledge system actually being implemented. You saw that the new education policy talks about making the Sanskrit universities bigger and all-encompassing and introducing Sanskrit-based systems into the other universities. And immediately the Indira Gandhi National Open University announced that they are launching Master of Arts MA program in Jyotish, in astrology. The Banaras Hindu University started a astrology department. And if you go through their preamble, you will find that it is full of pseudo-scientific statements. This university, Kavi Kulaguru Kalidas Sanskrit University, also started a BA in Vedang Jyotish, astrology. So this is what is happening. So in the name of the ancient Indian knowledge system, they are introducing unscientific things in the education system. Already it has started. It's not going to start. It has already started. This university, Sri Lal Bahadur Shastri National Sanskrit University, they have also started courses on Siddhant Jyotish, Vastu Shastra, Phalit Jyotish, and things like that. So this is where things are going. And in addition to that, they are proposing that every college, every school, every university, and IITs, NITs, everywhere, Sanskrit should be mainstreamed, and knowledge systems available in Sanskrit, based on Sanskrit, will be part of regular course. And this is really dangerous. So my submission is that we must protest and protect education from this onslaught. Thank you. I'm sorry that I lost connection in between, but.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor, for making a very provocative presentation. Well, ultimately, you said, universities which are going to be supposed to be scientific labs, scientific temper, now absolutely have become unscientific. They have given evidence about so many universities and colleges. And I said my introductory remarks I made. Banaras Hindu University recently, just about a week ago, introduced a 4-semester course, MA course on Hindu Dharma, in addition to what we have narrated. And these are very, very disturbing developments. And the only way we can is to have debates and discussion of this nature, enlighten, educate people, particularly students, so that these kind of unscientific developments, in the name of Indian knowledge system, all kinds of moribund ideas, unscientific ideas, the science which is based on evidence and scrutiny is not there. Now we'll open it for discussion. Very, very disturbing developments in India, which is taking place. I also said, in addition to that, another major development which is taking place, colonizing universities and colleges, and government UGC has already sent what kind of a research should be encouraged in colleges and universities. There is no, in addition to the disturbing developments which all of you talked about, there's also absolutely no academic freedom. History is being rewritten in the name of mythology. In the name of mythology. Very, very sad developments, and I'm sure all of us are academics, we should be protesting. Now we'll open it for discussion. You can make observations, comments. You can add. And then, maybe at the end of this, we will discuss, what kind of an action program we need to have so that, these kind of outdated, unscientific ideas are not discussed in universities and colleges. We'll open it for discussion. I see Bharati there. Would you like to comment, Bharati? Bharati Jagannathan?
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Then we see Gandhi Raj. Anyone can comment. We really had very interesting and very provocative presentations.
Yes, I am here. I am joined a little bit late. Good evening to all comrades.
Yeah, please go ahead. Would you like to add, comment, ask a question, elucidate, elaborate? Yeah. We will request, Professor Sumitra, Professor Kumkum Roy to look at, comment on the issues which has been raised by Sumitra Banerjee of what's happening in major universities in this country, of what kind of nature of courses they are introducing. Sumitra Banerjee, how do you look at it?
I do not see the comments. Where is it?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, Professor Kumkum Roy, to react to what you have said in terms of the disturbing developments which are taking place in the name of Indian knowledge system, the kind of unscientific courses in astrology, numerology, Vedas, Vedic mathematics, Manusmriti, yoga, and Sanskrit is a basis for all knowledge. Yes, Professor Kumkum Roy.
Thank you. I think that there is no disagreement about the fact that this is a very difficult situation in which we are placed. And on the one hand, one can see that there is a certain kind of effort to push through these courses at different levels. What I think is important for us to build up is a much broader understanding amongst people, not necessarily amongst academics, but amongst students and the larger population, civil society, to give them an understanding of the problems which we are discussing today. I think that there has been a kind of situation where the idea that we need to look at the past for contributions is something which is, the idea of national pride is something which is very strong. And it comes from the political context in which we are placed. And people are, by and large, very happy with the idea that we had this kind of a construct of a glorious past. So that, I think, is an issue that we need to address as well. And if there are any institutional and other mechanisms by which we can interrogate the introduction of these new courses, certainly that is something that needs to be attempted within institutions as well as elsewhere.
Okay.
I think there are questions coming in now. So
yeah. Yes. Any questions?
So Anita ma'am has raised the hand. Maybe she has a question.
Anita Rao, okay.
Yes, I am Dr. Anita Rao from Rupatunga University, Bangalore. There are many issues that are very disturbing and many developments under NEP which are also disturbing, which I would like to share with the others. On one hand, we appropriate Vivekananda and a man who was against pseudoscience. We introduced those pseudosciences in many universities. And then we say that Sanskrit has to be taught. But then the court in High Court in Bangalore says that no language can be forced, and so Kannada need not be a compulsory language. Then the worst scenario is that we have now a course where so-called ability enhancement course is English. And English has been reduced to 60 marks with an internal assessment of 40, which is, as you all know, gratis. And now they have reduced even the time of the question paper to 2 hours from 3 hours. Now, apart from this, there is a kind of a monoculture which is being spread. And the multiculturalism of India and the diversity is completely non-negotiable, especially when we talk about the South Indian concerns. The divide is there, and the South Indians are totally marginalized in this whole process. Nobody seems to even ask what South India wants. So there are so many issues which actually brought me to this forum, and I would like to people to discuss more about this. Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Soumitra Banerjee suggested that there's no other way except to protest. What kind of an action plan? University Grants Commission, AICT is saying, well, these courses are approved. You have your board of studies. You go through academic bodies, academic council. Syllabus is approved. They are saying everything is legitimized. And why are you protesting? Why are you saying that the syllabus is not approved by the academics? These new courses, in the name of science, as I've used the word pseudoscience, is being perpetuated in our campuses and in our curriculum. What should we do? What should be our action plan in terms of trying to put, against this outdated, moribund ideas?
So the problem is that it comes in a very clandestine way. Now, just when we were having a BOE meeting, we are told that it is a 2-hour paper and not a 3-hour paper. Can we even imagine what will happen to the so-called demographic dividend of our youth when, they really don't carry the proficiency of one language, which can be a lingua franca in India? I mean, 15 years down the line, I'm really afraid to even envisage the future of our youth.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about the national education policy. This is one policy document which was not discussed in Parliament during COVID time.
Exactly.
A cabinet committee was constituted and the cabinet approved it. And all over the country now, national education policy has to be implemented. And as Professor Soumitra Banerjee has raised, the kind of issues which are there in national education policy are quite objectionable. Debate, discussion has taken place in academics. And now, mainstream college.
Yeah, I think, point by point, these things have to be raised, and teachers really get these bits of information piece by piece. So it has to be comprehensively disseminated, this kind of knowledge.
One question from YouTube viewers. Shall I place, sir?
Sure.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So, Madhusudan Reddy, Mr. Madhusudan Reddy, he was asking that what are the consequences of those of spreading utter lies? How long would their quote-unquote reason, would valid evidence get sustained? This is the question from Mr. Madhusudan Reddy.
Should I answer?
Yes, sir.
See, there are attacks coming in various fronts. One is an all-out attack on scientific temper. Scientific temper essentially means that I accept only things that are supported by evidence. Now, if this basis of our understanding is muddled, then anything will go. People will not ask for evidence. So, therefore, it is also our task to defend scientific temper, to defend science in general. The attack is on education, on science. So, on the one hand, while they are proposing their own beliefs as India knowledge system, which do not have any evidence, we should show evidence that on one hand, whatever they are claiming are not true. And we should also show the positive things. That means there was development of knowledge supported by evidence. Through that, we should give people the idea that history is not somebody that not something that one can think of. History is not something a matter of belief. History is something that happened, and whether you accept it or not depends on what evidence you have. So this idea has to be given. Problem is that our history teaching also is faulty in the sense that we teach our students what happened, and we never teach our students why we know. How did you come to know that this really happened? And so now they are taking advantage of that and bringing one set of history in place of another.
Yeah.
So we have to tell students that history is constructed based on evidence. And in science, everything is accepted based on evidence. Yes, we can do that.
So can I
please
intervene? Right.
Yeah.
That's true. And don't we have to take responsibility as teachers also regarding, how we teach and what we teach? NEP is talking about multidisciplinary education, but then we still are not really talking about the importance of language, and we are not talking about the importance of humanities. They're painting science and humanities with the same brush and talking about the same kind of syllabi and research. They're totally done totally differently. And all those things are not being recognized because the policy decisions are not being made by teachers. And we have to raise our voice in terms of thrusting, the importance on language, on humanities, as well as science. Even now we are talking about science, but we are not really talking about the scientific spirit in humanities too. Something faulty also in the teacher. Don't you think so, sir?
Yeah, I would. Certainly, I will agree with you. There's absolutely no doubt about it. That is what we have been debating for quite some time. But how do you look at? I think our professor, Kumkum Roy should address this issue. What do you think about today in universities and colleges? They're talking about teaching Savarkar's quote unquote ideology or Golwalkar. How do you look at that? This is again very disturbing. Their contribution itself is a big question mark. But then colleges are introducing. Mainstream universities today are talking about Savarkar text and Golwalkar's ideology.
And Godse's movie.
Yeah. Professor Kumkum Roy?
Yes, I'm just coming on board.
You come from a mainstream university where in your own university, history is being written, outstanding scholars are questioned. They said, this is all left history. Now we have to have right history. All leftists have been writing history for the last 100 years. Now we need to have rights writing history. How do you look at it as a historian?
No, I think it's slightly more complex than that. And I think as I was listening to what was being said, there were a couple of things that came to mind. One, of course, is I think in terms of our responses, we need to also bear in mind that education still is a concurrent subject. So there are probably state, and by meaning the state universities and the institutions that are under the control of state governments in different areas, where perhaps a different kind of intervention can be planned. So it might be useful for us to look at what is happening in central institutions like the central universities. And of course, the IITs are also part of that system, and other institutions where there might still be some kind of space for a different kind of negotiation within the federal structure. I think it's interesting that Professor Banerjee made the point about historians simply stating certain kinds of historical facts without discussing how history is based on evidence. Actually, it's interesting because in the last round of school textbook revision, which took place with the National Curriculum Framework of 2005, one of the very systematic attempts that was made through the history that was taught in schools and the history textbooks that were developed by the NCERT was precisely to bring in a discussion about how sources are used to reconstruct history right from class 6 onwards, that is from the middle school onwards. And of course, that experiment is now going to be replaced by a very different set of textbooks, perhaps very soon. But it's not that historians have not done that. What I can see happening within the discipline of history is that over the last several decades, the history has become far more broader than what it was when we were students in school in the 1960s, where most of the time we were taught dynastic histories about kings, etc. And from there, we have moved away to a much wider understanding of both regional histories as well as histories of marginalized groups, including histories of tribal populations, forest peoples, and so on. So there has been a far more broadening out of the discipline. And to some extent, I think we need to also keep the social context in mind, where there is a constant attempt to reinforce and naturalize social hierarchies. We can see that public institutions, public educational institutions are now getting marginalized in many ways. These will be institutions which will probably, for some time past, this has been happening, and it will perhaps become even sharper, will be left to the relatively less privileged sections of society. So we are working in a very differentiated educational milieu, and we need to keep that context in mind when we figure out our responses. We cannot have one single response, but we need to keep on thinking of how to respond in a differentiated situation.
Yeah, I think another major issue we need to perhaps discuss is governance of these educational institutions. Both of you in your presentation talked about AICT and University Grants Commission. Many of these appointments of vice chancellors, appointments of faculty, appointment of professors is now very blatantly taking place all over the country with certain ideological bent of mind. People who believe in narrow, Hindutva kind of an ideology, and they are being recruited. And both of you, when you made your presentation, you talked about AICT's role, but AICT and University Grants Commission, all these academic bodies are today having these kind of people with who do not believe in plurality, do not believe in diversity, do not believe in secularism, secular values, and then the government is bulldozing these academic bodies to introduce what we have been discussing for the last 2 hours about absolutely which is do not have any kind of a basis at all, unscientific courses, in the name of history, in the name of mythology, we are teaching history. In the name of new knowledge system, we are introducing courses in astrology, numerology, Vedas, Vedic mathematics, Manusmriti, etc. As both of you have very, very said. How do we go about? The academic bodies, are legitimizing what we are teaching today in colleges and universities. They will say, well, it's approved by AICT, approved by the University Grants Commission, approved by the Academic Council of JNU or Delhi University or Kerala University. Now there's a big controversy going on in Kerala. The governor says, he doesn't want to be the chancellor of the university because he wants to have his own, agenda there. So how do we look, governance of universities, which is a big question mark today? Several universities are having people with this kind of an ideological bent of mind who would not have the right kind of a temper, as we have been talking about last 2 hours. Professor Sumitra Banerjee.
Sir, there is one related question from Hyderabad, Dr. Ramu sir.
Yes,
Yeah.
Let's hear the question.
Actually, that he was asking that in absence of student union politics and separation of faculty in universities, what is the action plan to counter the anti-scientific moves in universities?
Yeah, that's also the question I've raised, Professor Sumitra Banerjee. Saffronization of education, appointments of scientists, directors, vice chancellors, professors, with that kind of a, very, disturbing ideological mind.
See, these are aberrations that are happening in the educational scenario, as you have rightly pointed out. But the solution is that if the academic community is vocal, protests, and launches a movement to protect our education system, then they will not be able to get away with this. They will think twice before doing any such changes in the system. So it is our job, those who are in the education system, to protect whatever semblance of education that we have and to make it further scientific, secular, and democratic, rather than going in the opposite way. The government is now, through the new education policy, is trying to take it the opposite way, and they have already started implementing their ideas, both in terms of curricula, also in terms of recruitments, also in terms of leadership of universities. In every sphere, they are going ahead with implementing their plan. So we, the academic community, should now rise to the occasion and should resist this.
But the point is, Professor Sumitra Banerjee, that the fact that many of us have not been vocal, many of us are not protesting, as you are very, in a detailed manner, you made a presentation about how BHU, Kharagpur, IITs, and several other institutions have introduced these kind of unscientific courses. Do you think there was no protest by them? Or how did they get into the curriculum in the first place? How are these courses approved by these various academic bodies called Board of Studies, Academic Council, Standing Committee, and University Executive Councils?
Well, in individual academic institutions, because of the dominance of certain sects of people, some ideas may get through the Senate, may get Senate approval on the basis of majority opinion. That is why it is all the more important to launch a movement so that the people in those institutions, those who wish to protest against it, see that they are not alone.
Okay, thank you. We can take some more questions. Any more questions are there on YouTube or in the chat box?
Sir, I want to place one question. Actually, whenever we ask proof for these pseudoscientific or unscientific aspects, they will brand the people who are asking as anti-national nowadays. That has become a trend. Then how we have to define the patriotism, actual nationalism, instead of fake nationalism, because these aspects are coming now. Those who are asking proof, scientific backing for everything, then they are being branded as anti-national or unpatriotic.
Yeah, I think Professor Kumkum Roy should answer that question. How do you look at this the whole concept of nationalism? Are they saying, one of our participants saying fake nationalism?
No, I think it's very obvious that there is no single definition of nationalism. We also know that nationalism is something that is constantly evolving. So what is, I think, important for us is to stick to the basic constitutional principles, which today being Republic Day, we have hopefully been recollecting in spite of everything else that is happening around us, the commitment to processes of democracy and democratization. And I think we need to keep on asserting, in spite of all the problems and the obstacles that we face, that there is no one monopoly about defining nationalism or democracy. and we need to make our voices heard in whatever way we can. But I agree with the person who raised this question that the situation in which we are placed is an extremely difficult one. There is a need to recognize that it is an unprecedented situation. And it's also important for us to see that many of the changes we are faced with have also been the rapidity with which things have changed have also had to do with the context of the pandemic, where certain kinds of public discussions, etc., which we would perhaps otherwise have been able, and mobilizations which would otherwise have been possible, have not been possible in the same way. And many of these structural changes in educational institutions which were coming in earlier, we can see that those have come through in a much more rapid way in the last 2 years.
Okay.
So it's not an easy situation. There are very, very major challenges that we are facing, but hopefully something will survive. And also, I think what is important to keep in mind, this I speak as a student of ancient history, is that we have had periods when memories of significant historical figures or even significant historical documents and material have been lost for various reasons. We know, for instance, that memories of Ashoka were not available for several centuries within the subcontinent, within India in particular. But there are times when these come back. So hopefully something meaningful will survive and will emerge out of the present moment of crisis.
Yeah, any more questions we have?
Sir,
Yeah.
I want to say something. Hello,
Yeah,
am I?
Go ahead.
The point is that from today's webinar, it has been clear that the new education policy 2020 already has been introduced in many universities and government with their tricky intention. They started implementing many unscientific courses. They are appointing the peoples in the universities, in the IIT-like institution. And it has been also clear that majority in the decision when they passed these things, we people where we are working, sometimes it is not possible to protest inside the institution. Okay. But it's clear that in future our youths or education system, it will create a great havoc in the minds of the youths. And for this, what I feel that when Soumitra Banerjee is telling that we people in the academic sphere who are feeling that this new education policy 220 is creating havoc, creating disturbance, and unscientific scientific bent of mind they are destroying here from the outside, and same education policy committee may take the responsibility to create awareness. That is, I want to mean that a ideological campaign amongst the people, along with the students, that this new education policy in future will create a great havoc in terms of scientific bent of mind. It will destroy our thinking power and all other things. And the way the Banerjee.
We got your question.
Hello.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy you raised a very important issue. How national education policy is being implemented, and then the All India Safe Education Committee, as part of our narrative, we have organized this webinar to look at what's happening in the name of Indian knowledge system, what kind of courses etc. are being organized. Yes, your point is right. We have to it is very difficult for us to protest within the organization, but we need to have seminars, webinars, discussions, writing, scientific papers, maybe writing in the media. Then we can perhaps set an agenda. That is what all of them are saying. Thank you for your question. Any more questions we have?
Yes, sir. I want to say that after few years, the people understand the things once we can do it. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions we have? Shekhar? Shekhar from Bangalore.
Yes, sir. Sir, I think we can conclude, is it?
Yeah.
Not? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I just like to make one more observation. I'm Uma from Tamil Nadu. I would like to state that this situation which we are seeing in this education field, a very pathetic situation, is a larger reflection of our larger political system, where the dominant force is the fundamentalists of the wrong side, who are opposed to democracy and secularism, and we don't see any opposition in the way of secular thinking or democratic thinking representatives of people or parties being able to check the the great strides which these unfortunate fundamentals are doing. So as long as the national situation, the political situation in our country is in such a state, also thanks to the isolation of many of the right-minded people due to pandemic from protesting and creating public awareness, this trend may continue, and I hope not too much damage is done before we break this wrong trend of situation, both in academics and in our social milieu. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I thank Professor Soumitra Banerjee and Professor Kumkum Roy for making very, very excellent presentations, looking at from the historical account. And I'm also happy several participants have brought in the current narrative of what is going on in this country in terms of attack on scientific temper, rationality of mind, how in the name of Indian knowledge system, courses which are absolutely not based on evidence, not based on science, are being introduced. And many of you have suggested that we need to have some kind of an action plan in terms of in the name of science. Pseudoscience is being spread in a country which talks about diversity and plurality. This monoculture of trying to have monopoly over one culture is taking place. And I'm sure several of you have raised important issues. I think the idea of an All India Fair Education Committee is to have a webinar of this nature so that we can enlighten, educate, and get an understanding about what's happening. In the last 2 hours, we have learned how several universities in this country, the so-called mainstream universities in this country, are introducing all these courses in the name of Indian knowledge system, which have absolutely no evidence, no science, no scientific temper. And in fact, the role of colleges and universities is to inculcate scientific temper, rationality of mind and logic. And unfortunately, these kind of courses are being introduced. The only way is, like All India Fair Education Committee and others should get together and fight so that these kind of courses are not introduced. That's the only way in a democracy we can go about having. It's been a lively debate, a lively discussion. Several points have been raised, and the Civic Education Committee has taken note of all these issues, and we will try to raise it whenever we get an opportunity, policy makers, and try to educate our students on this. I once again thank all of you for participating.
Sir, vote of thanks. Sri Venar Shekhar will propose.
Yeah,
vote of
Shekhar
thanks.
will propose vote of thanks. From Shekhar from Bangalore.
Thank you, sir. Already Professor P.L. Visheshwar Rao, sir, has thanked all the speakers. I only endorse it. It was a very, very enlightening session it was. Both the speakers, Professor Kumkum Roy and
Professor Sumitra Banerjee. They have done a very wonderful work with all these slides and all what the presentation they made. I think it is a very, very valuable thing for all of us. It has been already been streamed in the YouTube channel. So I appeal to all our friends, fellow lecturers, teachers, and all the activists to take these ideas, and we have to further propagate it. And as you all desired, it should develop as a movement, a safe education movement. As our the president of this program, Professor P.L. Visheshwarao sir, he is really a fighter, is an inspiration for all of us. And he conducted this whole program very well. So on behalf of the All India Safe Education Committee, I thank all these speakers and Professor P.L. Visheshwarao and all the participants who participated in this program, in this Zoom, as well as in the YouTube channel. So thanking you all, and let us carry forward these ideas. And we do know that the secular-minded, scientific-minded people, and those who are opposed to these ideas, that number is very big in our country. The only thing is, all of us are not under one platform. So, as Professor Kumkum Roy told, we all should come together. It should be a very broad-based thing, and we should try to resist all these attempts that are going on. So, with these few words, I express thanks to all of you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a lively debate. All India Safe Education Committee will take up all these issues which have been raised all over the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you, one and all. I am closing the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, thank
May Shekhar ji?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, one and all.